Hey guys, John here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a conversation we were all having quite a few years ago when AI first came upon the horizon. And the question was, can AI ever have a mind or consciousness? Can AI have a soul? And so we're really going to return to this conversation and see three different philosophical perspectives on the question. So the first one we're going to touch upon is going to be René Descartes from his first meditations when we paraphrased cognito ergo sum, and really talking about what is this I that's behind the phrases that AI is saying. Then we're going to go to John Searle's The Chinese Room Thought Experiment, and we're going to really get into whether the semantics and the understanding when a computer says I feel or I think, does that carry the same semantic weight as if we were saying it? And then lastly, we're going to talk about Bertrand Russell, the problem of philosophy in chapters 1 through 3. And with that, we're going to be really exploring is the way that we come by semantics and the way that the computer comes by organizing its reality, are they really so dissimilar that we can't see that we're actually much more like each other than different? And so we're going to go through those three philosophical perspectives, and at the end, I'll give you some thoughts that you can leave in the comments below. If you like things like this, feel free to subscribe, and please like this video if you like it, and we'll just jump right on into it. So very first, we have René Descartes. So Descartes' going to begin his meditations with the question of if we're capable of being certain about anything. Much of us know about this method of discussion and self-reflection. Descartes pretends that there's a little demon that's tricking him into believing that all the things that he believes is real, when in reality they're not. He begins to realize that he's beginning to doubt everything. He's capable of believing the world outside doesn't exist, that people outside aren't real people, that they don't actually have minds, that he himself, his body, is something that is not very easily to prove if everything that he's feeling and perceiving is a delusion from a demon. But it gets to the point where he realizes that there is one thing that he can be certain of, that the demon can't trick him into believing is true when it's not, is doubting. His ability to doubt himself, the ability to doubt these thoughts are actually delusions of reality. And so he latches onto this, and he realizes that even though everything else can be skeptical and we can doubt those things, the one thing he can't doubt is this thought of doubt, is this thought of skepticism. And so we paraphrased it into the nice little phrase cognito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, to really hone in on this, that Descartes came to the conclusion that because he's capable of doing this activity, that is the thinking, this activity can't be done in a vacuum. It can't be done out of nothing. An activity must have something behind it. And this thing that's behind it is what he is interpreting as the I, what is central to his thinking itself. So I think and then this activity, therefore I am, therefore the I prior to the thinking must exist. Now bringing it into the conversation about AI, what is the I behind the conversations that we have with AI? We will see that the AI is actually using subjective expressions from a particular orientation. But because AI has such distinctly different ways of having input into its system than ourselves, it's hard for us to equate the same way we use I as the same way AI would use I in the exact same conversation with one another. So the question really is, when we say, I think, therefore I am, if we were to interact with a computer and the computer says, I think, therefore I am, would that give us reason to pause? Would we consider that maybe the computer is thinking? Or would we just say, well, it's just a really complex algorithm? And then, and then that kind of difficulty and that collision really causes a dilemma. Going on to the next philosopher, John Searle gives us the thought experiment that is widely known as the Chinese room thought experiment. So real quickly, what is the thought experiment? We say that you're in a small room and you're locked away, and that there's a small slot in the door in which these papers are put in that have these strange writings on them. We're going to say, and his thought experiment, they're Chinese writing, and we're assuming you don't know how to speak Chinese. But you do have a manual in your language there in the room with you, and the manual tells you exactly how to organize these different symbols that are coming through the door, how to organize them, and then how to push them back out. Those outside of the room, when they're giving you Chinese letters and then you're giving perfectly good Chinese responses, they're going to assume that you speak perfect Chinese. But you inside the room, you don't have any idea what a single one of these symbols mean. All you know is how to organize it in such a way according to the rules. And this is where John Searle is going to say that when a computer says, I feel sad, or I think, therefore I am, whereas we may be more likely to believe that from another person because we're able to relate so much to them, and we believe that they can have these experiences similar to ourselves that give the semantic weight to the words they're using. When we see a computer do that, it may very well be that the computer is just very, very good at organizing these words in such a way that you accept it, that it's able to follow the rules that it's been learning through you saying that's right or that's wrong to such an extent to where we believe that it understands these feelings, while in reality, the computer is only switched around zeros and ones in such a pattern that we agree and think is quite significant. What John Searle is trying to argue is that perhaps it's not that the computer is understanding or that it's feeling, but really it's just organizing these letters into such a pattern that we are actually just tricking ourselves into believing that the computer is actually feeling and actually thinking similarly to ourselves. How can we be certain that this computer, when using these expressions of feeling and thought, are actually carrying the same meaning, the same semantic weight as ourselves when we use the exact same phrases and words? But then the deeper question may be, how are we able to prove that we are feeling that way to someone else? Let's make ourselves the computer and we're trying to convince the person using the computer that we actually feel the same way as they feel when using a particular word. But they are being skeptical whether that is true for ourselves. So how would we go about doing that? How would we solve that conundrum? The third and final philosophical perspective we're going to explore is from Bertrand Russell. Now, Bertrand Russell, in his The Problem of Philosophy, chapters 1 through 3, is really going to explore the differences in which we gather information and whether we can really claim that anything we see and perceive as knowing or interacting with the reality is too terribly different from how a computer would be. He's not actually going to use the computer as the example. He's going to use our own method of knowledge, our own epistemological method for gaining understanding, but it's extremely relevant in this case. So what Bertrand Russell is going to bring up is how we gain information about our world. How do we learn what the world is? And of course, all our interpretation occurs in our brain, and all of that the brain is able to learn about the world is from our senses. Now, what's curious about the senses is that they aren't actually interacting with what the substance of the world is itself. Now, that might sound a little strange. He gives an example of a table, but we can use, let's say, a book. Okay, so with this book, we were able to see a particular color and pattern on this book. Now, we may be able to say, well, this is the color of the book. The color of the book is white and black. However, is that the color of the book, or is that the interpretation of the waves that are between us and the object itself? because really it's not that the color of the book is white, it's that the waves that are bouncing off the object itself and that we're interpreting with our eyes is what our brain understands to be white, but it's actually not the book itself. So let me just try to say it in a different way. Have in your mind that the waves from the sun or the light source hits the object and then it's bouncing off, right? So let's put our eye into this concept now. So our eye is actually not interacting with the object itself, it's interacting with the waves coming off of it. So what we're seeing is this waves in between the space between the book and our eye, but not the book itself. So now we can be skeptical whether we even know what the color of the book is, if it has a color at all, because it's not that we're seeing the color of the object, we're seeing the light that's bouncing off the object. But then he goes into shapes and textures and how hard something is. All of that comes from different senses that we have that actually don't speak about the object itself. He talks about how hard it is. Well, how hard it is doesn't talk about the object itself. It talks about how much pressure that we put on it with our sense organs. That's what we're interpreting is the pressure, not the book itself. Then he talks about the shape of it. Well, the shape is really dependent upon our orientation. As we learn from science, molecules are mostly air, mostly empty space, and their electromagnetic fields. So if we were to get super close to the object, we would actually see that there's really nothing that we have associated with substance, with matter itself. And so it brings up, well, what is the book itself? What's this matter? What is the actual shape? If I'm really close, it's mainly air. So what is this shape that I'm seeing? What is this interpretation that I have of this reality? And we realize that all these interactions that we're having are just appearances. This is what Bertrand Russell says. They're simply appearances of the object behind, or what we believe is behind the appearances, but we're never able to get to the object itself behind the appearance. So just really short, everything that we see and understand about reality, we get from an input through our sense organs and through simply inferring from that information what it is that is beyond our own mind. And so how does a computer get information? Well, it actually doesn't interact with reality either. It gets all its information from inputs put into it as a bunch of zeros and ones. And whereas the computer has 0 ones to work with, we have different electrochemical charges going through our nervous system in which our brain organizes it in a certain way. It's the same way as a computer does, and how it organizes and able to make patterns out of information it gets. So when we come to how do we know what reality is, if we are simply getting the information input, very similar to how a computer gets the same input, how are we able to draw the distinction between our thinking and the computer's thinking? And that is where we come to that final question. What is the difference, or what is very distinct about the different methods of learning from a computer and our own? Certainly we have different ways of input, and we have a different mechanism in which we interpret that input. But is the input and the organization of that information so terribly distinct? And if such is the case, what does that mean about our communication? What does it mean about Descartes' I? Is it so different from a computer's I? Would we say I? It also has to go with our meaning and our semantics. When we say I feel or I like something, but all that preference came from simply input and interpretation in our brain, how different is that from a computer that says I like or I feel in such a way, when it as well is only given its information from inputs and its interpretive mechanisms? And so the question comes back again, can AI have a mind? Can it have this thinking mechanism just like we have this thinking mechanism? And if it does, how can we tell the difference? So I'm going to leave that with y'all today. If you like it, please comment some of the thoughts that you have, how you would answer some of these problems. Like and subscribe. I'm going to see y'all in another video in the near future. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.